morning, I listen to those God sends my way. In my younger days, I would see all, I would welcome all, any time of day. But I have found true speech cannot be when one is on fire with drink. As you may suspect, not all come with holy intent. Only in the morning are my shutters open. So many come.
She was a 14th century mystic, theologian, and author. Julian of Norwich was a woman far ahead of her time, so far that she even represents a challenge to us in the 20th century. Stay with us as this medieval spiritual guide takes contemporary form today on Austin Faith Dialogue.
Old, rich and poor.
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC-TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. It's with considerable anticipation that we come to a first-person recreation of Julian of Norwich, presented by Linda Loving. Linda Loving has come to Austin to share her insights into this formative influence in the Christian tradition. Let's now catch something of the spirit of Julian of Norwich as brought to us by Linda Loving.
Sometimes I cannot sit still at sermon time. One would think the priest had holy oil poured on him to preach hate. God does not hate. God cannot hate. God will not hate what he has made. We are God's children. God said to the prophet Isaiah, "Can a mother leave her baby at the breast? Can she throw her child out of her heart? Even if she would, I will never forsake you." And Jesus said, my people, if only you would let me gather you under my wings as a hen does her chick." That is Jesus speaking. Jesus, our mother. As truly as we receive our flesh and blood from our mother, as truly as we are made of our mother's body, as truly as her body is earth and shall return to earth, so truly has the earth been made by God, who is in every sense our mother. That is the reasoning I used with a visiting theologian, a very learned man. I will not tell his name. "Dame Julian," said he, "how can ye call the Christ our mother?" And so I had to show him how God spoke his mother in Holy Writ. "It is but a woman's way," I said. "He that is so tender and loveth us so much, is not this the mother's part? And he that hath made both man and woman, doth he not possess the qualities of each? As the song is in the bird, and as in the seed is hidden the flower's color, is there not tenderness and womankind hidden in our Maker? And in thee, God's priest, is there not tenderness? I say Christ our mother, because it is the mother who best shows love. As the flower shows color and the sea and storm power, it is but an image, for how else may we speak? How else put what is inside outside?" He reluctantly agreed, but bid me hold my tongue.
Having had this glimpse of what this 14th century mystic Julian of Norwich thought and felt, let's now visit with Linda Loving, who brought us this first-person recreation. Reverend Ms. Loving is associate pastor of Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago. But now she's here in Austin, bringing her dramatic and theological gift to the Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary community. We're also pleased to have with us Ellen Babinski, professor of church history at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Professor, we're glad to have you, and we're delighted to have you, Linda. And I would like to just have you share with us a little bit about how you happen to come to be doing this first-person recreation.
Well, I had seen this play performed about 8 years ago at a women's conference and thought, I have to have this script. And I bought the script and sat with it for a while and finally felt led to tackle it, had a director that I used to work with when I was in the theater who had time to direct me in it. At the same time, it intersected with an arts festival at Fourth Presbyterian Church. So that's how it came to be. The script is written by a Jesuit priest, J. Janda, and it was an incredible undertaking. I hadn't done a one-woman show before, and it's not as much fun as Neil Simon, you know, when you've got cast parties and so on. It was just me and this script. So I learned a lot about solitude just in learning the script. But
I think that the one thing that, as you were doing this, that I thought about how you really got yourself into the part. I mean, this is a big gap between the 20th century and the 14th century. And how did you manage to get your empathy into that?
Well, partly it was forced, as I say, by learning the script. In order to memorize 100 pages, I was having to get up at 4 in the morning and the darkness and the solitude. And I began to understand that solitude and the prayer that comes with, oh God, can I do this, as I was learning it. And also integrating her lines, I found I really was starting to internalize her theology and her way of seeing the world and God. So over time and with every performance, I learned more about who she was just by going through her lines and discovering new readings each time, or the way it intersects with someone in the audience.
So you actually did a little recreation of her lifestyle in terms of
Yes,
being up early.
That's right, that's right.
And entering in something of the spirit of prayer that
That's right.
evidences.
That's right. And she was an anchoress, which meant that she had made this commitment to devote her life to God and to prayer and attach herself in a cell to the church in Norwich, England.
Okay, let's just focus on that. Ellen, give us a sense when she says she commits herself to a cell. I mean, that sounds rather confining. Is that the case?
Well, yes, it is the case. We don't know a great deal about the anchoress or the anchorite, which would be the male counterpart. However, we do have some texts that are now available to us in translation in modern English, which give us a sense of the rule or the set of rules and self-understandings by which the anchoress would live. Yes, she was placed in the cell, which would be attached to the church. She undertakes this life with the approval of the bishop. There is a particular kind of liturgy that is said with the commitment to the cell, in which the anchoress is to live to Christ alone and die to this life.
Well, now, to be alone means that she lives her whole life in the confines of this room. And,
as we understand it. Now, there are a lot of details we don't understand about it, but there is, as we understand, she lives alone. Most of the time, these women who became anchoresses were from the nobility and therefore would have a servant. And they were allowed to have one servant be with them and take care of whatever business that might need attention in the outside world. They were allowed to have a cat.
Okay. Well,
When it wasn't a bad life in those times, really. And she had a window onto the world.
you mentioned that.
Right, and
people would come by that window, and she would
for
look out and
spiritual
visit.
guidance, sort of the early model of a pastoral counselor.
I see.
And supposedly people flocked to Julian's window. Word was out that she was so understanding and just exuded this confidence in a time of great despair. The plague, the 100 Years' War, economic and social upheaval, peasants' revolt. It was chaos.
Sounds like the 20th century.
That's right. There are some parallels, indeed.
I think one of the things that is very important to emphasize, especially for us late 20th century types, who view this life as somehow self-contained and really rather focused on the self. And that is exactly not what the anchoress is. The anchoress undertakes this life for the sake of the people, for the sake of those who need to know that they have an intercessor with God who is faithful and faithfully interceding for them on an everyday basis.
I can't help but think that the downtown church that I work in on Michigan Avenue in Chicago would benefit greatly from having an anchoress attached to it. And
a window on the...
Exactly, and I believe people would stream to that window today.
Well, I was just thinking, being on 8th Street, where the church that I serve, gives me an idea of doing a pastoral counseling in a new way.
I think the other point to that window is not only that she can hear the confession, not hearing confession in the sense of a sacrament, but to hear the person's fears and to hear their concerns, especially their fears for their salvation. Very real fear. Does God love me? Am I going to be punished eternally for the things I've done wrong? And she is an extraordinarily important person to offer this kind of assurance.
Okay, now that comes to the point that you were making in this first clip that we saw, that she is communicating an image of God as mother, which even today is jarring to some folks' ears. And you mentioned a theologian that came along and was shocked by it at that time. But is it in the context of trying to reassure people who are afraid for their salvation that there is a tenderness there to meet them?
Very much so. When you think of what the church, institutional church, was like at that time, with a lot of emphasis on sin and guilt and damnation and so on, that word of tenderness was well received. And it was also her pushing at our not trying to confine God. You know, that God is so much bigger than anything we can put into words, that she goes with these other images of God. And it's nice to know that was happening centuries ago. It's not as radical as many think, even though it may be hard to the ear of many people. It's very encouraging to broaden our understanding of who God is.
And who Christ is. You talked about Christ as mother. And did you have any other thoughts on that?
Two points I would want to make. First of all, her concern about God as mother, Christ as mother, are metaphors, ways of expressing the compassion and the infinite mercy of God. One important point that she makes is that whatever sins we have as human beings, they cannot exceed God's mercy or Christ's mercy. That God's mercy is always greater than our sin. And there's another point historically that I think is important to make here, that at this time in that Julian was living, there was this terrible schism in the church between Rome and Avignon. And this caused a great deal of concern and anxiety on the part of the people. Who to believe? Where is the authority of the church? How do I know that the priest who is offering me the sacrament of forgiveness is a legitimate priest? And so what Julian succeeds in doing is to reinstate or to shore up the people's confidence in the fact that the church does indeed offer salvation.
Okay, this is break in the Roman Church at that time is bringing us to our break in our program here. But I think that as we return, we'll have a chance to continue to pursue some of these issues, and particularly I'd like to be coming back to the idea of our feminine image of God, which is a very real issue in our church today. We're going to have to be away for just a bit, but when we come back, we'll take the opportunity to look at another excerpt of Linda Loving's recreation of Julian of Norwich. Stay tuned.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627, because serving Austin means serving you.
See the flowers, the city faces, they never end. Like love, they are always beginning, never ending. No more than closing the eyes can stop the pear tree from blossoming can love be stopped. Love is like that. The Christ is like that. We may close our eyes, but he is always here, within and without. He simply cannot break troth with us. He is largeness, he is largesse, he is bounty, and the goodness that everything hath, it is he. Wit it well, love is his meaning. Spring with all its freshness is now upon us, but the spring shall pass to summer, and thence to fall. Fall with all its bright leaves and berries, a season of husks, a season of woods fringed with late-blooming asters and tangles of weeds of sharp fragrance, a season of honeycomb, quince, winter apples, a season of ingathering. Fall is a time of crushings for wines and ciders, a time of coopers and carpenters, oak barrels and wood shavings, a time of stooks and stalks, haystacks, sacks of grain, of field mice and crickets. Fall is nature's pageant, its crowning carnival, a rich earth tapestry, the weavers, the dyers, the colored yarns, stained glass windows, dusty marketplaces, parrots, minstrels, acrobats, hounds, and hawks, the spices, cinnamon, pepper, chamomile, clove, a time of peaceful streams with ducks and geese floating in red, orange, and green of reflected tree colors, a time of quiet churches, of dark churches with windows ablaze with jeweled lights and stone pavement softened with color from rose windows, a time of warmth and evening prayer. There was darkness all about me as if it had been night, save in the image of the cross, whereon I beheld a gentle light, and in that halo of light I looked upon my Maker, my gentle, courteous, helpless, dying Maker. I beheld the face of my Savior. The red blood was flowing down his gentle face, down from under the thorns, down that sacred face, down that innocent face, down his helpless face, forming and flowing, forming and flowing, falling as rain, heavy drops of rain that fall from the eaves, as rain drenching leaves, falling, falling, falling. I believed the very sheets of my deathbed would be soaked in scarlet red. And I continued to look upon that face as I felt hot tears and my heart swell. For in that face, I beheld the face of all that is wounded, all that is suffering, the lost child, the mocked mute, the withered mother with no more milk to give. I felt my heart would break with grief. I felt I could be shown no more. But he did look upon me and said, "My daughter, I have embraced your pain. It is part of my pain. When you suffer, I suffer. My blood rain is watering your roots. I am everyone. I am everything. You are me, and we are all one. I love you more than my life itself. Know, my daughter, know that I would die 10,000 times if thou wouldst but believe."
We're back on Austin Faith Dialogue with Linda Loving and Ellen Babinski. Both of these persons helping us gain insight into Julian of Norwich. That was most touching, what we just saw. And you identified with that in some obvious ways. Mm-hmm. The detail of what she saw in the world around her.
Yes, yes.
Just a marvelous eye for things. Mm-hmm. And then that other scene where she was identifying with Christ on the cross in a way that just continue that for us, if you could.
Yeah, and she really had a deep desire for this vision of Christ on the cross, and it was something she longed for, to experience his suffering so that she might live more fully for him. And it was a gift to her as far as she was concerned, and it's what she then spent her whole life writing about, was this vision of Christ speaking to her from the cross.
I would die 10,000 times.
Yes, right. That's right. That's right. And then she so shares that message with everyone else, to know that Christ's suffering is for us, and also a lot of talk about the unity with Christ and in that suffering, and then the oneness that we have with one another and with creation, with her descriptions of fall and so on.
I mean, that was quite a list.
Well, I know, yes.
Must have been a chore to remember all of that.
Yes, it was.
Just repeat some of the things that...
Oh, a time of husks, a season of berries, with woods fringed with late blooming asters and tangle of weed of sharp fragrance. Yeah. I can't walk in the fall now without going through this whole litany. And it's really deepened my appreciation of nature.
Ellen, now that's not your usual theology, which is very abstract and that kind of thing.
Interestingly enough, there are a number of medieval theologians who in their writings express their awareness of the things of nature, especially those theologians who understand and work at the notion that all things not only are from God, but all things are in God. As the formula goes, all things are in God, and God is in all things, but all things are not God, nor is God all things. So it's this interesting...
So it's not a pantheism.
No, not at all, not at all. But recognizing the praise of the Creator in the things that surround us in nature. And so therefore, to recognize even the green on a leaf is to recognize the marvelous creation that is God's.
Another line of Julian's is, God is all that is good, and the goodness that everything hath, it is he.
It is God. And that is a very classical, mystical statement, that all things that are because of God's goodness. That insofar as anything exists, it has goodness in it. Because evil, absolute evil, is nothing, or nothingness, or the void, or the abyss. So that insofar as anything is because of God's goodness. It's an extraordinary statement to make.
It's not unique to her, and yet she gave it a very special expression.
Much so.
And one of the things I think, before we go further and need to be clear about, is how she got her name. I mean, Julian is not a usual...
Well, you take on the name of the church you attach to, and it was St. Julian and Edward Church. So we don't know what her real name was. See, there's so little known about her because she never wanted to point toward herself.
And Norwich was on the east coast of England.
In the east coast of England, and this was in the 14th century, and she was the first woman, at least whose work survives that we know of, to write in Middle English, contemporary of Chaucer's. And so you're right, many mystics believe these things, but her ability to capture it, her poetry and her beautiful style of writing, and being the first woman to do so is unique.
Well, I want to come back to what we were talking about.
First woman in Middle English, because there are other women mystics as well who are writing.
Yes, Middle English, that's right. Yes.
Okay. And did you want to share some of these others?
Well, just to say that we're becoming more and more aware of many women mystical writers, mystical theologians from the medieval era, beginning as early in the 12th century. Hildegard of Bingen is another favorite theologian of many persons these days. And she wrote in the 12th century.
Okay. And so that was, again, not unique in terms of her being a woman in Europe doing this, but as far as being the first of this particular language period. Okay, I'd like to come back to the image of God, or Christ, as mother. And it's the real issue in the churches today. This is where I see what you're doing as having a good bit to do about issues in our congregational life, in our liturgies, and the fact that people are are resistant, even today, to thinking of God as anything but Father, and not feeling comfortable in prayer to refer to God as anything but Father. Just in terms of your own pastoral practice, how do you incorporate some of Julian's emphasis on the femininity of God in your worship?
Well, in general, in the congregation I'm in, we try to mix it up. We try to just use the broadest base that we can of metaphor and images for God, and if we are using masculine pronouns, to try and use feminine as well, and just you know, have some balance. I must say I really enjoy being able to bring that word in a character from the 14th century. I mean, that's part of the gift, is people are much more willing to hear it through this play and in this character. So I like to think that that's impacting in some way liturgies as I move around to different churches. But it kind of depends on the congregation and the area, how used to people. But if it's new, it's going to sound strange to people, but the only way to grow into it is to keep enriching their understanding.
I understand that in the Christian Science Church, for instance, for decades, since Mary Baker Eddy started her work, the Lord's Prayer begins, "Our Father, Mother, God." And it's a sense that you're trying to incorporate some of both in your prayers, and but maybe would refer to God as parent rather than just as Father.
Yes, that would be another.
One of the important aspects, I think, in this discussion of language about God has to do with the whole theological realm of human expressions, human language, and the limits of human language to discuss or describe or to talk about God adequately. The mystical writers from the medieval era certainly understood also that human language had its limits, and therefore there was one way of talking about God, namely called the negative way, or the via negativa, that to say anything that we say about ourselves cannot be said about God. And so therefore when we say that human categories cannot apply to God, that opens the realm of divinity wide open to a whole range of ways of speaking, because not any one of them is an adequate description of who God is.
Well, I think what you've done by being with us today is open up our minds to a relationship with God that is, we in turn are indebted to Julian of Norwich for, even here in the 20th century. As our time is coming to an end, we want to thank Linda Loving and Ellen Dubinsky for being with us, and want to thank you folks for joining us on this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson. Be with us again next week, and peace be with you.